Fallout 4 has a really strong gameplay and exploration system, but its story, while strong initially, becomes a complete mess by the end of the game. Act 1 provides backstory and motivation for the player, while the ending is just filled with contradictions, underdeveloped factions, and quests that are just laughably bad. That's why today I'm going to explain why. So without further ado, let's get started. So we start Fallout 4 just like any other game in the series, with a slideshow of the world, except in Fallout's case it's footage of pre-war America. One thing that's important to keep in mind is that Fallout 4 was a major evolution of the franchise. There were new implementations that were added to make it easier for a new audience to grasp. This game is a lot of players' first introduction to the series, so some background knowledge may be necessary so that the new players are brought up to speed. I honestly like this cutscene a lot. Fallout has never really disappointed me when it comes to its opening cinematics, and Fallout 4 is no exception, as it shows the beauty of Fallout pre-war by displaying those technological advancements and all the scientific breakthroughs that were achieved during this time, but it also shows the problems of the world, like how jobs are being lost rapidly and how natural resources are depleting. It's after this where we finally get to see our main characters, Nate and Nora. Most of Fallout's protagonists are quite bare bones when it comes to their background, as a lack of one helps create a character that the player wants to make. Fallout 3 just gave the player the background of a vault dweller whose father escaped the vault, and New Vegas gave the player the character's profession of a courier. All of these games use the small knowledge of the character's background as a base for the overall story, but Fallout 3 and 4 had that background be about the protagonist's family and the situations they find themselves in. As for the voice acting, lots of people had issues with this as they preferred substituting it with their own voice, which continued to strengthen the relationship of the player and the character together, but for me personally, I don't really mind this. Continuing the trend of firsts within this series, it's the first time we also get to see pre-war America. The only other time was during Operation Anchorage of Fallout 3, but that was in the middle of a war, and it didn't really convey the lifestyle of the American citizen before the bombs. Fallout 4's intro is all about establishing to the player what life was like prior to the Great War. We can see the technological advancements in play as we can interact with the family's Mr. Handy unit Codsworth, who's assisting with the family in any way that he can, like brewing their coffee or taking care of the baby. We also get introduced to the more grim side of the game as we can hear a news broadcast about the ongoing conflict between America and China, and we also get a visit from a Vault Tech representative who wants to sign us up for the Vault program. Since the creation of nuclear bombs, both China and America have stockpiled hundreds of them ready to launch whenever they want. So Vault Tech created these vaults, which were made to keep the American people safe just in case of a nuclear fallout. One thing that this intro has that may not be apparent is tension. As a completely new player, it seems just like a normal intro to the game, but to anyone who's played Fallout before, you know that the Great War will be starting soon, you just don't know when. Maybe it'll happen in-game, maybe it'll happen in a cutscene, maybe this intro is just a dream. Regardless of what it could be, the bombs haven't dropped yet, and at some point they will, and that creates immense anxiety. It's not until a few minutes later after playing with Sean that Codsworth yells to the couple in a panic as the news reporter addresses to the American people that the nuclear war has started and the Great War is about to begin. The most rational thing to do in this situation is to rush to the vault before a nuke hits. This whole section is really interesting to look through as there's so many people doing different things. There's a couple trying to put their bags away in the car, and another couple is just embracing one another as they await the impending doom. For the most part, they also nailed the urgency of this, as bikes and bags are just dropped on the ground as there are people trying to get to the vault as fast as possible. As we cross the small creek, we make it to the gate, which has quite a long line. All of these families are stuck and are not allowed to enter. Even the Vault Tech representative from earlier is denied. Thankfully, since we signed up just minutes prior, we're able to bypass the line and make it to the vault. We barely make it in the nick of time as the nuke detonates in the distance. The couple, along with all the other survivors though, do manage to enter Vault 111. This section once again creates different feelings depending on the player. To a new player, this might feel exciting or intriguing to explore the new vault and what it entails, but to someone familiar with the game, this sounds like a nightmare. For those who are unaware, vaults in the Fallout universe were designed to shelter the American people, but were also designed as testing labs that the higher-ups of Vault Tech could test various different situations and see what the outcomes were. Vault 111's experiment was to unknowingly test the effects of long-term cryogenic suspended animation. None of the vault dwellers knew of this experiment ahead of time and were just told to step into the cryogenic chamber. Given the other vaults we've explored in this series, this one is actually quite tame. We, along with our spouse and son, enter the cryopods waiting to be awoken. After an unspecified amount of time, the pods do actually open, except it's not Vault Tech. We see a scientist and a mercenary talking to our spouse before an altercation breaks out and our spouse is shot. We get a brief look at the killer before being sent back into cryo and then awake once again. We as our protagonist just witness the death of our wife and the kidnapping of our son, and eventually discover that the vault staff has been killed and the vault itself has been overrun by giant rad roaches. This whole sequence while we're in the vault is really well done, and is one of the reasons why I liked voice acting in this game. Our protagonist is not like others that we've played before. We didn't grow up 200 years after the bombs fell, we were there when it happened, so seeing a rad roach would obviously be scary to anyone who's never seen one before. Plus the voice acting when you open up the pod is just really great.
Come on! There has to be a release! Come on, come on, come on! Oh, God!
It really displays the urgency of Nate as he tries to save his wife even though he knows it's too late. This area serves as a tutorial for the player as they're introduced to vats, locked doors, terminals, and of course the Pip-Boy. When they step onto the pad and get sent up back to the surface, Fallout does its classic blinding lights reveal to show the aftermath of the bombs and how this place was devastated by the Great War. Fallout 3 had some wonderful environmental design at the entrance as it showed skeletons of those who were denied entry, and Fallout 4 is the same, as skeletons of the presumed families and military we met in the intro are just laying here. It was an even better way to showcase how horrific this event really was, as these were our neighbors, and that's a frightening feeling. After the exiting of the vaults and arriving in the Commonwealth 200 years later is where we get to begin the game and subsequently head into Act 1. As a wrap up for the prologue, Fallout 4 starts off incredibly strong with a great cinematic opening and wonderful introduction that satisfied both new and old players by giving the new players feelings of excitement and curiosity, but also giving the old players that same feeling with a few drops of fear, not knowing when the Great War will start, but knowing that it's coming. Act 1 of Fallout 4 opens up the world, allowing the player to go where they please, but of course for our purposes we'll just follow the main quest. Right away we have a strong start in regards to logical progression, as our protagonist's main motivation is to find his son, so obviously our task will be going from place to place, asking if anyone has seen him or might know where he was taken. The first act of the game is very reminiscent of Fallout 3, as you go from one place to another trying to find your father, except in Fallout 4 it's your son. The story also functions the same way mechanically, as instead of going from one place to the next in order, you can skip the parts in between. A player who goes from Sanctuary then to all the places in order, like Concord and Diamond City, will have the same outcome as someone who skips right to the end. Fallout 3 did the same thing by letting you skip right to Rivet City, and I've always liked this idea. On a first playthrough, you'll more than likely follow the path the game provides, but there are a few people who may have skipped ahead and thus got a different playthrough. They may have not met Preston Garvey until hours later, which will ultimately change the way the game plays. This is also beneficial for multiple playthroughs, as logically it makes sense that as long as you get to the important NPC, in this case being Nick Valentine, who cares how you got there? All the NPCs prior were just pointing you in a different direction, so whether or not you meet them is irrelevant. Once again, of course though, for our purposes, we'll just go in order. The first person we meet after exiting the vault is Codsworth, who is more than delighted to see us. Codsworth has always been a favorite of mine, especially when talking about what he's been up to for 200 years.
Codsworth, you're acting a little bit weird. What's wrong?
Oh, son, it's been just horrible. 2 centuries with no one to talk to, no one to serve. I spent the first 10 years trying to keep the floors waxed, but nothing gets out nuclear fallout from vinyl wood. Nothing! And don't get me started about the futility of dusting a collapsed house. And the car! How do you polish rust?
You can clearly hear the emotion in his voice, and for a robot that's quite surprising. He'll then direct the player to Concord, where we see a shootout between 2 groups. After clearing out the raiders on the street, we're then instructed to continue helping as there's more inside. After all of them are dead, we can meet with the mysterious voice who is Preston Garvey, leader of the Minutemen. Preston explains that the Minutemen have fallen on hard times, that he's the only Minuteman left, and that the original group of settlers he was running with had a population of 20, but it's now down to 5. Given the people in the group, Preston seems to be the only capable soldier, so it's quite obvious how they managed to lose so many members. It's this problem that causes him to ask for our help once again, as more raiders will arrive and we need to drive them back. He lets us know that there's a downed vertibird on the roof of this building, but there's also a suit of power armor and a minigun inside of it. Using this should be more than enough firepower to wipe out the raiders in Concord. In fact, I'd argue it's too much firepower, as a Deathclaw arrives and dies just as fast. As fun as it is to run around with a suit of power armor mowing down dozens of raiders, I feel like this section shouldn't belong here. Power armor and Deathclaws have always been seen as endgame content and the thing all players strive for. Power armor will always be the best armor in the game, and Deathclaws are easily one, if not the strongest enemy in the series. But Bethesda showed their hand too early. Getting power armor or being able to defeat a Deathclaw felt rewarding. All the time and effort you put into achieving this goal has been rewarded with something, but it never feels like this in Fallout 4. To be fair, the game does add variants of enemies, so while a regular Deathclaw might not be strong, the mythic Deathclaw sure is, but that's not the point. It's not about the variant, it's about the enemies themselves. Seeing the super mutant behemoth at GNR in Fallout 3 is an unforgettable experience. This was a lot later in the game compared to Fallout 4, and yes, while the game also provided the player with with power armor and a heavy weapon, it's a fat man. Mini nukes are incredibly rare compared to the 5mm ammo of a minigun, and Fallout 3 required power armor training, which isn't accessible until much later. Fallout 4 doesn't have any power armor training and gives the player a strong weapon with plenty of ammo. It sours the experience of wandering the map and accidentally running across the Deathclaw, and it sours the feeling of finally achieving power armor for the first time. It requires no effort on the player, as Bethesda wanted to give them instant gratification, and this is why I think Bethesda created the quest this way. You obviously want to hook the player into your game, so why not give them the best set of armor in the game and a powerful gun to go with it? But what also doesn't help this quest case is the difficulty and how laughably easy all these difficult enemies are within the story. And it's that part that is very important, as I'm talking strictly within the confines of the story. Out in the Commonwealth, these enemies can be encountered at any point, so you may have full power armor or just a pipe pistol. The enemies are only as strong as your gear, as that is the independent variable in this equation, but within the story, it's a joke. Concord is a town, which means it'll have buildings with doorways that are too small for the Deathclaw to walk through, so you can completely destroy the Deathclaw without ever taking any damage. The Super Mutant Behemoths are the exact same. The first one is defeated while using the minigun on a vertibird, and the other two are killed by Liberty Prime in the Brotherhood of Steel ending. While I understand that Bethesda wanted to hook the players in and showcase more action scenes to give the player a power fantasy, it just felt like this fight was added way too early into the main quest. However, despite my issues with this, Fallout 4 is the first game to finally showcase the weight of power armor. It's not just some armor you can slip on whenever you want. It's a suit of steel and requires multiple moving parts to work properly, and while I do hate the tediousness of having to get out to access a workbench or how long it takes to get in and out of the suit, it's the best version of power armor in the series. This is why I wish Bethesda would have saved this for later, as both of these discoveries would have created an unforgettable experience. And to be fair, when I first played the game, I loved it, and I won't ever forget this scene, but looking back on it more critically, it's clear that this was done much better in other entries. As I said earlier, at Concord, we meet with Preston Garvey, leader of the Minutemen. You can continue to talk to Preston Garvey as he and the group will seek refuge at Sanctuary, but we'll get to that later in the video. After Concord, Mama Murphy tells us that the next place to find our son is Diamond City. Alright, look, I understand the developers needed some way to tell the players where to go next, but was it really that hard to just have Preston tell the player that they know a detective who specializes in this sort of thing? People like Mama Murphy aren't unheard of in the series, as there's the Psychers from Fallout 1 and even the Forecaster from Fallout New Vegas, but Mama Murphy always felt like a joke character to me. Like, oh, Mama Murphy's blabbering on again about the good old days, she must be high off the jet. I didn't think Bethesda was actually going to make her an important role in this story. It's definitely an odd nitpick to have, but I've always found this weird. Once inside Diamond City, we can meet with Nick Valentine, the head of the detective agency here in the stadium, except Nick's gone missing. His assistant Ellie tells us that he went out on an investigation and never came back. Obviously, we need Nick or we're not going to find Sean, so regardless of what situation he put himself in, we have to find him. Depending on where you go after this or how long you actually stay in Diamond City, an altercation may break out. It'll be here or when you meet Nick where you start learning about synths. As for the first encounter, it seems to be two brothers having a dispute, with one of them pointing a gun at the other. The brother with the gun claims that the other is a synth and wants to kill him. As for the other encounter, when we meet Nick, we realize that he's not even human. Fallout 4 does a good job of slowly giving away information in regards to what's going on. Within the game's world is the Institute. They're a group of scientists that the people of the Commonwealth see as the boogeymen. They utilize synths to do most of their dirty work, as the group has 3 different generations of synths. Generation 1 and 2 synths are very robotic. In fact, Nick is a Generation 2 synth, and Gen 3 synths are what is causing the paranoia like the one we see in Diamond City. Generation 3 synths are almost indistinguishable from human beings. This will play into a mission later with the Brotherhood of Steel, but for those who have never played this game before, to give you an idea, Harkness from Fallout 3 and even the mayor of Diamond City are synths. You might be asking, how are they synths? They don't look like one. That's the problem. To even make a Generation 3 synth, the Institute kidnaps people and replaces them with a robotic body, which is why they look like humans. That's what's causing the paranoia. People don't want to be kidnapped, so they're really terrified of the Institute and synths, so anyone affiliated with them will be shot. It's a really risky situation to be in, as this could mean your family is just a synthetic robot, and that's what makes the Institute such a fantastic faction, at least for now. They are this infamous folktale with 0 bases of operation anywhere near the Commonwealth, so people are confused whether or not they even exist to begin with. Just like the Minutemen, the Institute will come into play later, so we'll hold off on their story for now. After making our way to Park Street Station, we run into a new gang called the Triggermen. They are this little gang with a small quirk, that being that they look like 1950 mobsters. Fallout has had this problem for years, where the developers make groups with a different name but change very little. The Fiends, Vipers, Talon Company, Gunners, and the Triggermen are all just mercenaries or raiders with different names. There's barely any info in regards to a proper backstory, and there's never any quests related to them that give them any time to break free from the others. Like I said, it's not a Fallout 4 issue, it's a whole series issue, but I thought I would bring it up anyway. Skinny Malone is the leader of the Triggermen, and he's holding Nick hostage, and it's our job to break him out. Assuming you survive, Nick will travel back to Diamond City with you so he can help find Sean. And from the details we relay to Nick, we discover that from this information that a man named Kellogg might be involved. This is a small detail, but I really enjoy the way Nick goes about handling the information process. He has Ellie behind him writing down information and checking prior cases just in case anything relates to their prior work, and the way he determines certain actions is really well done. Like when he questions why someone would just kidnap an infant specifically, and determines that it's not a random kidnapping, but rather someone planned for this to happen, meaning someone is pulling the strings on this operation. He felt like a real detective, and even the mission after felt like a real hunt, and I've always appreciated that. Back to the mission, Nick is well aware of who Kellogg is and even remembers where his old residence was in Diamond City. The problem is that the door is locked. The game provides numerous ways to open the door, which I've always liked. It's really nice to give the player the freedom to complete an objective, even when it's as small as opening a door. Once we get inside, we have to search for clues, which leads to the discovery of a hidden door. Nothing is here, but we do manage to find Gwinnett Stout beer and San Francisco Sunlight cigars. We can then use dog meat to track his scent, and hopefully that'll lead us to him. The actual trip itself was nice, and it was a combination of investigation and combat, so things didn't really feel too tedious on the way there. We managed to make it to Fort Hagen and discover that Kellogg is in the building. We finally come face to face with the man himself and discover that he was working for the Institute, which means the Institute had a hand in Sean's kidnapping, except we still don't know why. Obviously, we know how this is going to end, so we fight Kellogg, and it's a really tough fight. He has invisibility, and his pistol is incredibly dangerous. Eluding his body, we can either discover that he was a synth, or at least partially synthetic, as he has mechanical components in his inventory. Kellogg sadly is very good at covering his tracks, and we once again turn up empty-handed, but due to some brainstorming, Nick suggests that we can go to the Memory Den. The Memory Den is a place in Good Neighbor, and they have this technology that allows you to relive your past memories. It's weird and is definitely never explained how this works, but we've seen pods used like this in very similar ways, like Operation Anchorage and Tranquility Lane in Fallout 3, so this isn't really too far-fetched for the universe. After Dr. Amari hooks us up, we get glimpses into Kellogg's life where it seems that his childhood was quite rough. As he got older, he started taking on riskier jobs to support the family and would eventually come in contact with the Institute. It's also hinted that Kellogg was given tech upgrades to prolong his life, as when he was a kid, the radio announced that 5 states would join to become the NCR. It's unclear when this happened, but the first leader, President Aradesh, became the president of the NCR in 2189, so Kellogg would be extremely old by now, which is clearly not the case in-game. It's a nice detail and a really cool discovery for those who are familiar with the old lore. After being hired by the Institute, Kellogg was tasked with kidnapping Sean, but we still don't know why. After he kidnapped Sean, he would take him to his house in Diamond City before being taken by an Institute courser and given instructions to hunt down a scientist named Virgil in the Glowing Sea. Before the memory disappears, we do discover how the Institute is able to operate, as the way to enter is via teleportation. After exiting the memory den, we can talk to Nick about what we found out, but we've discovered that Kellogg is now speaking through Nick. This is a horrifying discovery, as it seems that in some way Kellogg is still alive, but it never gets brought up again. Not in the main quest, not in the side quest. Hell, Nick brushes it off when we bring it up to him. This whole plot twist starts and ends in a few seconds, so I have to ask, why even bother adding it in the first place? The only thing I can think of is that some writer had a really good idea in mind, but it was cut and then never taken out of the game. It just shows a lack of quality assurance at Bethesda. Our next objective is to find this Dr. Virgil, who was originally employed by the Institute, so if anyone knows how to teleport in and out of the facility, it's going to be him. If you're starting to think that this game is really padding out its main quest, you'd be correct. We're now entering Mission 7, and we just figured out who's behind the kidnapping. It's not until Mission 10 when we finally make it to the Institute and discover why Sean was kidnapped. This is because Bethesda put all their money on the reveal of the Institute. I'm going to summarize the events of these upcoming missions rather than extend this video longer than it needs to be, as I don't want to take up more time than necessary. So basically, after the memory den, we make it to the Glowing Sea, meet with Virgil, who says we need a courser chip in order to teleport. We find a courser near the CIT ruins, take the chip in his brain, craft a giant teleporter, use the chip as the authorization key until we finally make it to the Institute. Like I said, there's a whole lot of padding in this part, and it was honestly boring me trying to write about it, so I thought a summarization would be easier. Bethesda really wanted to surprise the player with the reveal, so they made this long drawn-out journey, which more than likely had the opposite effect than what they were intending. In this playthrough, minus a few side quests here and there, I went from main quest to main quest. Even adding on the fact that I knew where I was going and how to get there, it still took me around 9 hours to get it into the Institute. Keep in mind, many players will not do what I did for this playthrough and instead dedicate tons of time to side quests and settlements. So it could take double or triple that time just to enter the building. So the question still remains, was it worth it? Initially, 100%. The reveal that Bethesda was holding onto for so long is that the leader of the Institute is your son. Since he was taken out of cryo after being kidnapped, he aged like a normal human and is now a 60-year-old man in charge of the Institute. The big bad boogeyman of the Commonwealth, the group that presumably kidnaps people and replaces them with robots, is led by your own son. It's a fantastic twist and one I did not see coming. This also presents a problem, as it's quite obvious that the Institute will have a hand in the ending of this game, so are you willing to go against your family and its wishes for a different, possibly better alternative? It's a great reveal and one that had me questioning some of my future decisions throughout the game, at least for the most part. After arriving in the Institute, we finally make it to the last act of the game where all the endings take place, and it's here where Fallout 4 completely falls flat. Fallout 4 has 4 different endings that are related to the 4 main factions: the Minutemen, Railroad, Brotherhood of Steel, and the Institute. I'll say this now, then explain when we get to the specific factions, but the Brotherhood story is quite impressive. The Institute's is underdeveloped, and the Railroad and Minutemen do not belong in the main quest whatsoever. Firstly, let's start off on a high note with the Brotherhood of Steel. Fallout 4's Brotherhood of Steel is probably the most consistent faction in the entire game. They have one goal, and they stick with that goal until the very end. Their goal is also clearly stated, which is to eradicate the Institute. The Brotherhood of Steel preserves old technology and destroys other technology that is deemed too powerful to be left in anyone's hands. The Institute is that technology. The ability to create synthetic organisms and being able to teleport at will while also making breakthroughs in other fields is grounds for blowing it up. It was clear from the moment Elder Maxon spoke what the Brotherhood stands for and what they want to accomplish, but I don't even need to explain this as Maxon explains it perfectly.
By attempting to play God, the Institute has taken the sanctity of human life and corrupted it beyond measure.
All I've done for the Brotherhood, all the blood I've spilled in our name, how can you say that about
You're the physical embodiment of what we hate most. Technology that's gone too far. Look around you, Dance. Look at the scorched earth and the bones that litter the wasteland. Millions, perhaps even billions, died because science outpaced man's restraint. They called it a new frontier and pushing the envelope, completely disregarding the repercussions. Can't you see the same thing is happening again? You're a single bomb in an arsenal of thousands, preparing to lay waste to what's left of mankind.
You're comparing Dance to a nuclear bomb?
This machine might not be a bomb, but its goal is exactly the same. Place it where you want the damage done, and when you least expect it, it delivers a lethal blow without warning and without mercy. A precision strike delivered right at the heart of the enemy. How can you trust the word of a machine that thinks it's alive? A machine that's had its mind erased, its thoughts programmed, its very soul manufactured. Those ethics that it's striving to champion aren't even its own. They were artificially inserted in an attempt to have it blend into society.
To put it simply, the Institute made the decision to create synths because they could rather than ask if they should. That speech of his was extremely powerful, but where Maxon fails is at the nuance, as he sees all synths as bad regardless of background or circumstance. This makes him quite simple-minded and unwilling to reanalyze his own beliefs, but it's because he's written this way. Just because his worldview is idiotic doesn't make him a poorly written character. Maxon is a static character within the story, one that never changes their views, beliefs, or values regardless of what happens, and it's what makes him such a great character in this game. The Brotherhood of Steel's main quest will either start when you meet Paladin Dance or when you see the Prydwen enter the Commonwealth for the first time, and I appreciate that this ending and other endings blend into the game. With Fallout New Vegas, we had our one main goal, which was to kill Benny. After we kill him, we get introduced to Yes Man, which is one of the endings, and then afterwards we can walk over to the Lucky 38 and start Mr. House's ending, but not before being stopped by the Legion and the NCR. All 4 factions before Benny have no missions for us, and then afterwards they all come out at the same time. Fallout 4 attempts to make things flow more smoothly, however. The Brotherhood of Steel has 14 missions to accomplish in its ending, and 6 of them can be completed before arriving at the Institute. This goes for all the other factions too, minus the Institute, obviously. It was a unique and welcome change as it made the game feel a bit more real, making it seem like these missions were just a natural progression to what we were already doing, as you could do the endings alongside the main quest, as opposed to just having them appear. Assuming we start from the beginning, we meet Paladin Dance at a nearby police station who we assist in fending off some feral ghouls. The East Coast Brotherhood of Steel is no stranger to recruiting recruiting outsiders, so after we showcase our combat prowess, Paladin Danse wants to take us on a few missions and see if we really have what it takes. During one of these missions, we get our hands on a deep-range transmitter, which Danse uses to fix the Brotherhood of Steel's communication relay. It's unclear if this was the reason the Prydwen was called into the Commonwealth, but if it was, then it's the start of our actions having meaning. The Brotherhood of Steel story has us go through all the ranks of the Brotherhood, from Initiate to Sentinel. Each of these ranks has some sort of reward, and the missions we are given are reflective of our rank. At night, Paladin and Sentinel were given new paint jobs for our power armor, but also get other upgrades like the medic pump and jetpack. The missions also get progressively more difficult as we do simple retrieval missions in the start like the one with Paladin Danse to eventually leading the assault on the Institute. It feels like we're actually making progress within the faction, although I do understand the criticism of this as many claimed it's bizarre that you can go from the lowest to the highest rank in the Brotherhood in just a couple days. My only defense is that it's simply just a game. I don't have a problem if things are sped up to keep the game interesting. What I care about is making sure that I feel like I'm actually progressing. After the Prydwen arrives is where things start to get exciting. If anyone is going to have an aircraft, it's the Brotherhood of Steel, but an airship is next level. This is the home of many soldiers within the Brotherhood and is under the command of Elder Maxon. The reveal of this caught me by surprise. A Brotherhood airship was nowhere near the top of my list of things I would encounter in this game. The ship for the most part seems rather realistic. I've never been on an airship, but there are numerous decks dedicated to controlling the Prydwen and repairing its systems, and there's even a main deck where all the doctors, vendors, and cooks all sit. It seems like a place that you could actually live in. The game also forces us to speak to some of the leaders of the ship so we're more familiar with its inhabitants and its layout. After this is where we start to hit the meat of the story. The main goal of this Brotherhood chapter is to wipe out the Institute, and the best way to do that is with Liberty Prime. All of the missions after arriving at the Institute are all about building Liberty Prime. We attempt to recruit Dr. Lee, who was a scientist who worked on him back in Fallout 3. We also attempt to hunt for specific parts like a high-powered magnet and a beryllium agitator, which will come into play later. But during this, however, two important quests appear. One is related to the Railroad, as the Brotherhood sees them as a threat to their operation and need to be wiped out, and the other is the discovery that Paladin Danse is a synth. We get the order from Elder Maxon, and we are given no other option but to execute him for being a synth. Now, obviously, that's the only option he gives us, but when we do meet with Danse, we can talk to him about the situation and convince him not to give up his own life. Danse can agree with our decision and decides to just run away from the Commonwealth, but before we can see him leave, Elder Maxon gets to him first. We have to convince Elder Maxon to spare Danse, or else we'll have no choice but to execute him. This quest was incredible, and would not have been as impactful if it was anyone but Danse. He was the one who sponsored us, and is the reason we're even in the Brotherhood to begin with, so the fact that we have to kill not only a fellow soldier but a dear friend is rather heartbreaking. It's also pushing against Maxon's belief, as he thought of synths as the enemy, but one of his own paladins who did nothing to betray the Brotherhood is a synth and now has to come to terms with the situation, whether that means killing Danse and continuing to believe all synths are bad, or realizing that not all synths have malicious intent. It is a tough decision for him, but he does stay true to his word and refuses to see Danse as a person. The finale of the Brotherhood questline is exactly how you'd expect. We escort the Brotherhood and Liberty Prime to the CIT ruins and blow a hole in the ground that leads to the Institute. We then make our way through the Institute, place a fusion charge on the faction's reactor, escape, and then blow up the facility. This fight is really difficult, but given that the Brotherhood of Steel has soldiers geared in full power armor, this was a cakewalk. Before blowing up the Institute though, we do get to meet with Sean before he dies and can have one last chat, which I always thought was a nice touch. We can even talk to the synth version of Sean, which we saw when we first arrived at the Institute. I'm not entirely sure what Bethesda attempted to do here, but my only guess was to give the protagonist a chance to actually raise their son as they had originally wanted. It's a cool detail, but for me personally, it just wouldn't feel the same, so I've always left him there at the Institute. It's after this where we get to see the end credits, and once again, I'll address that later once we finish all the factions. Our next faction is the Institute. We continue where we left off in the main quest, and we discover that the head of the Institute is our son Sean. He knows that we no doubt have questions and is willing to answer any that we have. From our talk with Sean, we can discover that the reason the Institute had kidnapped him back then was because he had pure DNA. The radiation of the wasteland corrupted a lot of people's DNA, and the Institute needed a DNA sample in order to make Gen 3 synths, so to have the best chance of success, they would need someone's DNA who was untouched by the world's radiation. That's why Kellogg was annoyed that he had to kill our spouse, and why he calls us the backup, as just in case Sean didn't work out, there's at least another Vault Dweller they can use. To answer the next question, which would be why an infant and not us, well, it's quite obvious that it's really easy to corrupt or convince a child rather than an adult. Especially considering at Sean's age, he probably hasn't had consciousness yet, so his entire life through his eyes has been with the Institute. It's also here where Sean says that the Institute is humanity's best hope for the future, and that the Institute has the Commonwealth's best interest at heart. You've already established a backstory and even a motivation as to why the Institute exists. It's also a great way of making the faction a bit more gray, as they seem like the evilest faction in the Commonwealth, but maybe working with them we may realize that they're just simply misunderstood. However, this doesn't happen. Just like on the Pridwin, we're tasked with meeting the division leaders in the Institute and are told to explore the robotics, facilities, bioscience, advanced systems, and the Synth Retention Bureau divisions. By exploring these areas, we can see that the Institute is contradicting itself. The Facilities Division is about maintaining the Institute systems on a day-to-day basis. The robotics is where the synths are created, the Synth Retention Bureau is dedicated to tracking down rogue synths, bioscience is all about maintaining the food and water within the Institute, and the Advanced Systems Division was created to expand their own technology like teleportation and synth weaponry. So how does this relate to the Institute having the Commonwealth's best interest at heart? It sounds like they're trying to be as self-sufficient as possible. In fact, that's exactly what they're doing, as a few missions later we're told to find that beryllium agitator we talked about before, as that could power the Institute's nuclear reactor, so now they never need any power from the surface. With that reactor, they can now be 100% self-sufficient and can now live underground forever. Once again, I have to ask, how does this help the Commonwealth? It sounds like the Institute doesn't care about anyone above ground, yet claims to have their best interest at heart. How is that possible? To this day, I still have no idea what the Institute actually wants in this game. There was a clue at one point, but that plot was completely dropped almost immediately. After the Battle of Bunker Hill mission, we meet with Sean, who steps outside for the first time, and upon talking to him, he says that the Commonwealth is dead and there's no future here. This sounds like a great start to a new plot, as Sean dedicated years to helping the Commonwealth only to realize it was doomed from the start, thus it caused him to focus on just his fellow scientists and leave the Commonwealth to die. Except this idea was never brought up by Sean, so we can't assume that's what he's thinking, plus as we discussed earlier, the divisions within the Institute only perform tasks to benefit the Institute, so saving the Commonwealth was never their plan to begin with. Regardless, what's more important is the present. With the Commonwealth lost in the eyes of Sean, what will the Institute do now? Will they attempt to help other places in the United States? Will they take the route of the Brotherhood, and instead of helping the people directly, maybe wipe out the super mutants while they're at it? No. They don't do anything. The only divisions in the Institute that don't completely benefit the facility is the Robotics Lab and the Synth Retention Bureau. They do use synths for janitorial purposes within the facility, but they also have coursers who hunt down rogue synths and also capture people to replace them with synths. But why? They're already self-sufficient and have no plans of helping the Commonwealth, so why bother making more synths? I understand that some of the synths are used as a way to keep an eye on people in the Commonwealth, but if they plan to stay completely underground, what's the point? Do you see how confusing this is? The Institute has no clear goal at all throughout the game, and even if they did, the divisions within the Institute do not mesh with that goal at all. It's the most confusing faction in this game because no one knows what they want. Hell, not even Sean knows what he wants, and that makes this faction a complete mess. Assuming you shut your brain off while you play, the quests aren't too bad. Most of them are related to making the Institute completely self-sufficient, as they collect the beryllium agitator and hire a man named Wallace who should be useful in evolving their current systems. Throughout these quests though, we've been periodically going to meet with Sean and the division leaders, and it's announced here that Sean is dying of cancer and that will be the new director of the Institute. It's quite a shock to hear this, as despite the fact that he works with the Institute, he's still our son. That's why we have those last words with Sean at the end of each ending, as he's slowly getting weaker and weaker, and even if we didn't blow up the Institute, he probably would have died shortly after anyway. As director, we really don't get to do anything. We get to make one choice on whether or not to upgrade the synth's weapons or to mass produce more of them, but that's about it. The Institute finale is where we as the director order the synths and coursers to attack the Railroad and the Brotherhood of Steel. Attacking the Brotherhood is actually pretty cool, as we infect the Liberty Prime with a virus that caused him to self-destruct and blow up the airport and the Pridwin. It was a cool mission, and the all-out war that occurred during this quest was pretty cool too. The only quest we haven't discussed though is the Battle of Bunker Hill, as I wanted to save this for last as it relates to our next faction. Battle of Bunker Hill might be the worst quest in the entire game for one specific reason. Bethesda did not play test this at all. One thing we haven't mentioned but has been happening throughout some of these missions is the point of no return. Before the start of a mission, you might get a message saying that continuing this mission will make you an enemy to this faction. Should you accept, all NPCs of that faction treat you as hostile and you cannot complete their quest and subsequent ending. However, before this, the faction is in good standing with you. The Battle of Bunker Hill is what happens when you introduce the point of no return too late in the game. I said before that you can do many of the faction's missions before even getting to the Institute, as Fallout 4 blends them in seamlessly, but that's where the problem lies. Battle of Bunker Hill doesn't have a point of no return message because the mission includes the Brotherhood, the Railroad, and the Institute. As for the mission details, in the basement of Bunker Hill is 4 synths. sense. Given the values of each group, the Institute wants you to take them back, the Railroad wants to sneak them out of the Commonwealth, and the Brotherhood wants to kill them. It turns into this large 3-scale war, and on paper it's fantastic. In practice, it's fucking awful. Since there isn't a point of no return, the player can keep good standing with all factions. So assuming you join the Railroad, the Institute, and the Brotherhood prior to this mission, it's a 3-way war where no one shoots at you. Obviously, any faction that is friendly to you won't attack, but if all of them are friendly, then no one attacks you and you essentially become a spectator. It's not like this is even a rare circumstance anyway. All you have to do is just join each group, and assuming you want to explore the Commonwealth and experience all the game has to offer, then you're going to end up in the same predicament. It's a sad excuse for a quest, and while I could dock points on the Institute for having this quest, this isn't the only faction this happens to. Overall though, the Institute is a mess. It's a faction with lots of potential but not a lot of development. It's a faction that has no clear goal or motivation, which is required if you're going to not only be the antagonist of a story but also one of the main factions within the story. We the player don't know what the Institute wants because the Institute itself doesn't know what it wants, and that's pretty embarrassing. The Railroad is our third faction and is dedicated to freeing the synths from the Institute. It's a really cool concept and one that intrigued me right away. You have to go through this long scavenger hunt to following this red trail to an old church before putting in a code that leads to their safe house. In my opinion, the Railroad does not belong as a main quest faction and would be much more useful as if it was used as a secondary faction like the Boomers and the Great Khans of New Vegas. Within New Vegas, the Boomers and Great Khans can be used to help complete your mission, like having the Boomers bomb Hoover Dam or convincing the Great Khans to fight for you. They don't have a main set of missions but can help factions that do. The Railroad should have been this faction. The only problem that arises, though, is the conflicting motivations the other factions have. The Railroad would not want to help the Brotherhood of Steel or the Institute as they go against what they believe in. I'll admit, there is definitely some holes in my idea, but regardless, at the end of the day, the set of quests this group has is terrible. The first quest of the Railroad is called Tradecraft, where you and Deacon, another member of the Railroad, are to infiltrate the switchboard to recover some technology. The switchboard was an old base for the Railroad that has been overrun by synths. This mission is exactly like Battle of Bunker Hill, as if you're allied with the Institute, the synths will only focus on Deacon, allowing you to walk right past them. The next mission is where things start to get a little interesting. Desdemona, the leader of the Railroad, informs us that there's a scientist within the Institute that has been trying to help synths escape. He says that there are 13 synths ready to escape whenever we're ready, but Desdemona uses this opportunity to go behind the scientist's back, and instead of rescuing 13 synths, wants to rescue all of them in one sweep. It's not a terrible plan, it's definitely risky though. Desdemona says that the number one problem the Railroad face is manpower. There just isn't enough people to launch a large-scale attack by themselves. Her plan is to have the synths fight for their freedom, as the number of synths that will join the fight should even out the numbers. Once again, it's incredibly risky, but maybe worth a shot. To prepare for this, we need to talk with synth Z114, who instructs us to kill the guards guarding this tunnel. This is so that they can be undisturbed while the rest of the synths craft weapons for the upcoming rebellion. However, we can't just kill the guards then start shooting, as crafting weapons takes time, so Z114 tells us to keep Sean on our good side so he doesn't suspect anything is wrong. This means we have to do the Institute ending until a certain point, and that certain point makes no sense to me. Firstly, we are Sean's father, so getting him on our side is not even a problem, and we're also technically the director, so he shouldn't even be a problem anyway. But what bothers me the most is, to complete the Railroad quest, we need to help the Institute. For a faction that prides itself on saving synths, it's crazy that we have to recapture 5 synths and power the Institute's nuclear reactor before we can start our rebellion. We are literally making the Institute stronger, which would then make our rebellion that much harder. Even though we have done all of that waiting to get to this part of the quest, we still can't do the rebellion yet, as we get a warning that the Brotherhood of Steel is about to invade the safe house. We push the small group of knights back, but then the game completely loses me. Due to the overwhelming power of the Brotherhood of Steel, some of the Railroad members died, including its best soldier, Glory. So it's basically Deacon, Tinker Tom, Desdemona, and us. We are by far the most capable soldier in this faction, and everyone knows this, as the others are thanking us for helping. They said that without our help, they'd be dead, so it's clear that without us, the Railroad would be nothing, and this isn't a good thing. This means the faction can't operate smoothly without intervention from the player, making this a bad faction. I don't know whether or not the writers gave up after this point, but they continue to run with this, as our objective is now to fight the Brotherhood of Steel since they shot first. To do this, we need to assault a nearby police station that has Brotherhood members, kill the soldiers, then take the vertibird to the Pridwin. The only people on this mission are Deacon, Tinker Tom, and us, so once again, it's thanks to us that we got the vertibird, and this quest reaches the ultimate peak of absurdity, as the great plan that Tom and Deacon come up with is for the player to blow up the Pridwin alone. We need to place 3 explosive charges, then run out of the blast zone before we blow it up. I genuinely laughed at this plan. There is no way the writers thought a solo assault on the Pridwin was a good idea for a quest. It's just bad and there's no way to justify it. After blowing up the Prydwen, we finally get to start the rebellion, which leads to the same ending as the Brotherhood of Steel, where we place the fusion charge on the reactor and blow up the Institute, with the added bonus that we did rescue some synths. If it feels like we're ending this faction discussion quite early, then you're correct, as the Railroad only has 6 main quests in its ending, which is far less compared to the other factions. The reason behind it is that half of the Railroad's questline is dedicated to completing the Institute questline. Within those 6 quests though, only 1 or 2 of them are actually good. Given the number of quests the faction has, and the fact that the faction literally wouldn't exist without the player's help, it shows that this faction shouldn't be a part of the main quest at all. Even though the Brotherhood of Steel assault the Institute just like the Railroad did, they at least are highly trained soldiers in power armor. The Brotherhood is the only faction I can see actually standing a chance against a full-on invasion against the Institute. I don't have a problem with games making the player the sole reason the story moves along, but when it's as bad as the Railroad, it's a problem. Going back to the Brotherhood of Steel, yes, we made the high-powered magnets and found the stash of nukes and was responsible for leading the charge to the Institute, but we didn't build Liberty Prime, and we didn't do all the shooting during the escort either. We had assistance. Every single mission in the Railroad would not be completed if not for the player. You had to escort Deacon to the switchboard, you had to be the middleman between the synths and the Railroad, you needed to kill the guards so they could craft their weapons, and you needed to destroy the Prydwen on your own. If the Railroad lost every single member in the faction but the main character, it would still be the same faction as it was before as it is now, and that's when you know you've gone too far. Our last faction is the Minutemen. I have the same feeling about the Minutemen that I do with the Railroad in the context that they should be a secondary faction. This one's a bit more believable than the Railroad, as the Minutemen have no natural enemies, so siding with either faction wouldn't be a problem at all. All the Minutemen care about are the settlers and residents of the Commonwealth. They want to protect them from super mutants, raiders, and ghouls, which has always made me scratch my head as to why they were given an ending in the first place. The Minutemen start out right away with the worst example of rewarding gameplay, as within minutes you're made the leader of the Minutemen. I don't think I need to explain how incredibly dumb this is. All we do is save Preston and build a couple settlement stuff for Sanctuary, and we're already general. Even if we were to ignore that, we don't even get the experience of being a general, as Preston still makes all our decisions and gives us all the quests we need to continue, so we're simply just a general by name. The Minutemen's main quest as a story is not too bad, as you go around helping other settlements with their issues and showing the people of the Commonwealth that the Minutemen can be trusted. Taking into account actual gameplay, it's pretty boring. It's a faction that is filled with radiant quests, and some of the actual missions are locked until the player has gotten more settlements on their side, so it's just endless radiant quests that are done and over within 5 minutes. After taking over 4 settlements, Preston wants to make a move on the castle, which used to be the faction's main base of operations. The quest is quite fun, and you do get to take down a Mirelurk Queen, which is cool too. After a few days, a woman named Ronnie will use the castle intercom to call us and request that we meet her at the castle. She is apparently an old war veteran of the old Minutemen and want to join up again after seeing what we've accomplished. Once again, a really solid mission, and we also get access to artillery units that we can use in combat. Everything is starting to go really great, until just like the Railroad, it immediately nosedives. Our next quest is called Form Ranks, which is activated by completing the quest Inside Job and Banished from the Institute. The Inside Job quest is where we give Sturgis a holotape of the Institute's network, and Banished from the Institute is exactly what it sounds like. After this, we then have to recruit 8 total settlements before getting an emergency distress call that the Institute is invading the castle. We can then use the settlement system to build defenses and hopefully hold them back. The castle defense is actually really fun and can vary in difficulty depending on how much material you've been stockpiling for this, but the issue is that this mission shouldn't have even happened in the first place. To complete Banished from the Institute, we either have to kill Sean, a named scientist, or unrelated to killing things, we have to pass those points of no return we discussed before. The point of no return for the Railroad quest is on the last mission, so you literally cannot do this as an option since you're on the last mission and there's no turning back. The Brotherhood is the same way, except it's the second last mission. This is technically a viable option, but who would get to the end of the Brotherhood questline then stop, especially after doing a dozen quests with them? This leaves us with our only option, which is to kill Sean or the staff, meaning we have to willingly become enemies with the Institute so that we can finish the Minutemen questline. The writers couldn't think of a natural way to make the Minutemen the enemy of the Institute, so they forced the player to go out and kill someone at the Institute also that they can continue the quest. This just shows that the Minutemen shouldn't even belong here. It's not a natural decision and is forcing the player to do something just to complete the main quest. The cherry on top of all of this is that numerous times Preston will ask why the Institute is attacking us like we didn't just kill a bunch of their staff to do this mission. It's probably the laziest faction in all of Fallout 4. It's a faction filled with radiant quests that had to be forced into conflict by the game itself so that they had a reason to be included in the game. Bethesda tried to give the player more options by giving us 4 factions to choose from when in actuality it's really just 2. as the Institute and the Brotherhood of Steel are the only factions worthy of being considered a main faction. If that wasn't already bad enough, Fallout 4 doesn't even bother being creative when it comes to its ending. 3 of the 4 factions all have the same objective, which is to use the fusion charge to blow up the Institute reactor. This even continues in the endgame slides. Bethesda somehow managed to go backwards with Fallout 4 as it has less variety than its predecessor. Depending on who goes into the Purifier in Fallout 3, there was a different narration. It wasn't as expansive as New Vegas, but it was a start. Fallout 4 has a total of 5 slides, and only one of them can be changed. The first slide only changes based on your ending, except it's only the Institute, since the Minutemen, Railroad, and the Brotherhood of Steel all have the same ending, which means the slide at the end of the game is the exact same. The narration in these slides is also just bare bones, as it's just the character talking about their family and how they wish things were different. We don't get a single word about what the future of the Commonwealth looks like thanks to our choice. We don't know if the Brotherhood left after defeating the Institute, or if the Minutemen became a much larger faction after the settlers heard of the news of their triumph. We get nothing. It made this journey completely worthless. All these quests made us feel like we were making an actual difference when it never mattered to begin with. Fallout 4 starts strong but plummets the moment we leave the Institute, and while the game is still fun to play when it comes to gameplay and exploration, its story is awful. It's full of underdeveloped factions, contradictions, and quests that at some point make no sense at all. To put it simply, Fallout 4 is a complete mess. Thank you all for making it this far in the video today. I usually don't like making negative videos like this, especially when it comes to Fallout, but I feel like it needed to be said. If you want to watch other Fallout content, I have videos for Fallout 3, New Vegas, and 76 that are much more positive than this one. If not, I have some other great videos like my analysis on Cyberpunk 1 year after release, and why Prey deserved more attention than it got. As always, like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new, and of course thank you to my returning viewers for coming back. Take care everyone, goodbye.